Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, and thank you for coming this afternoon. We have two very special things planned for you this afternoon. We have the ASCL seminar as well as the African Thesis Award. My job right now is to introduce the seminar speaker, Professor Shuaib Lwasa. So I'm going to give you a very, very succinct and very brief overview of who this person is, and then I will leave the floor to him because if you come across me, I like to talk, so I'm trying to hone that in today. So Professor Lwasa joined the ISS as a professor of urban resilience and global development in October 2022. And in April 2024, he took up an additional position as the chair of spatial planning for urban resilience at the Faculty of Geoinformation Science and Earth Observation, ITC at Finter. He has over 2 decades experience in higher education and research at Makerere University in Uganda, at the University of Cape Town, Manchester University, and the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC. He's also the founding coordinator of the Urban Action Research Lab in Kampala, as well as the LDE East Africa Research Network LEARN, with the Nuvoni Research Institute in Nairobi as its center. So he investigates urban transitions and resilience in global South cities for fun. And his research focuses on traceable urban development challenges for actionable, scalable, innovative, and equitable solutions related to climate change adaptation and resilience in global South cities. He also works on informality in the global South and has contributed to a wealth of knowledge in these spaces. Today, we're very privileged because he has agreed to give us his inaugural seminar at the African Studies Center entitled Urban Transitions in the Global South, Harnessing Opportunities and Expanding Possibilities. Prof. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mandy, for that introduction. And thank you so much for inviting me on the Studies Center here in Leiden, my first time at the university. So please, I'll be very pleased if you can walk me around the university at least for a couple of minutes. And I'm very grateful for this invitation because as Mandy mentioned in the introduction, I've worked at granular level in terms of communities, and that's where mostly I come from, having spent over 2 decades at Makerere University in Uganda, but also international level. So this lecture or seminar is very much informed by what I see as emerging from the granular level and how it can inform the global systems. So it will be framed that way from the global system and then going back to the granular level in terms of trying to look at what possibilities there are and how they can be harnessed in urban places. I also want to sort of start with the caveat that most of the work on African urban issues is not just granular and community-based, but it's also very specific on either a sector or a subsector. And it tends to usually take the orientation or spin of problematizing urban Africa. And that problematizing of urban Africa, despite being really on spot and good, it also has a downside in the sense that we tend to be overly fixated with solutions-oriented approach to urban, and yet we don't see the opportunities. So that motivates the talk this evening or this afternoon. Good. Presentation. Yeah, so I would like to start off by giving reflections on what I think of as global urban systems. And you can notice that I'm not starting off with definitions. I'm not starting with statistics on urban Africa. That is very much in the public domain now. We know Africa is the youngest urbanizing region globally. So I don't have to give the statistics. It's also urbanizing very fast. And we know that Africa is also entailed in urban infrastructure and services deficit. But what does the global system say about that entanglement? One of it is that for many decades, urban has been conceptualized through what I call a toolbox of development. And that toolbox focuses a lot on prosperity, but it also focuses a lot on systems that are networked and centralized, which have entrenched what I think of as path dependencies on cities. So cities are usually looked at as jurisdictions, administrative units, where control of the infrastructure and network systems is easier, because then you can easily say, well, we have a department of water in the municipality, we have a department of public health, we have a department of transportation. And the idea behind it is that once each of those are worked on well and investments go in the right way, whatever right way that is, then seamlessly the urban system will be integrated. In African context, we don't see that integration. So that's why we push back to say, look, that toolbox doesn't seem to be working for everyone. We need to rethink that toolbox, and we need to recalibrate and try to break loose from the path dependencies on urban systems. And that has created a lot of problems, a lot of challenges that are intractable, issues to do with investments that continue to be very much shaped by the international financial architecture. So I'm talking about MDBs or multi development banks, the bilateral financing, which comes a little bit in small pieces and doesn't match the growing demand for the infrastructure and services. So there's that mismatch. And in most of these developments or processes for the encapsulated in the toolbox, the social cultural dimension is quite weak. And that is because of maybe not mainly, because there is a focus on physical elements. So it is for transportation, the focus is on roads, right? And now the new age of urban development in Africa, the focus is not on roads, but also light rail and monorails. So there's even celebration in a few countries on the continent that have been able to put up investments in this area. So Ethiopia is one of them, of course Morocco was in the lead, and then there's most recent one in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, which has been celebrated, and everybody thinks that this is progress. But then if you go deep and you walk the streets of Addis, and you go to the stations of this the monorail or the metro, you see more people walking towards the bus stop and fewer people walking towards the metro stations. Every other time I go to Addis, that's what I see. So the social cultural dimension is weak, but it's not just social culture, but also the structural economic issues that are very much characteristic of many African economies. And then, of course, resource consumption continues to be on a geometric growth in Africa, with not so high carbon footprint. But if you project it in the future, the likelihood of that happening is going to be high. And I also want to mention here that having worked with colleagues for the International Fund on Climate Change, when we look at urban system and assess if this and the literature that is happening or is coming through on urban systems, it's very clear that Africa, as a young and urbanizing continent, if business as usual continues, then it's most likely going to be one of the highly emitting continents. But that is in the long term. In the medium term and short term, the opportunities for actually cutting loose from the path dependencies are very clear. And if we do so, then Africa will remain a low-emitting urban continent, and it can possibly provide the leadership in the transition, especially the energy transition. Of course, that is arguable, and many people here probably say, wait a moment, that is not possible, but I think that is very possible. So urban and cities also is something to think about, because urban goes beyond the city jurisdiction, as I mentioned earlier, and yet the fixation is about cities, the jurisdiction, the boundaries that are identifiable and controlled. Anything that falls outside that is usually not included in the planning, the investments, the support, as well as the technical aspects of it. So some of the thoughts that I'm going to give are very much informed by the assessment from IPCC, particularly Working Group 3, which is on mitigation, but since AR5, the assessment report number 5 of IPCC, there's been a lot of integration of both Working Group on Adaptation, Working Group 2, and Working Group 3. So we worked very closely together on urban chapters and even regional chapters to really integrate the literature. And from a mitigation perspective, that also integrates adaptation. There are three main There are three main categorization of cities. Those that are established, so the mega cities of Lagos, Cairo, and the like. Those that are rapidly growing, the Kampalas, the Nairobis, the Addis, and those that are emerging, the small cities. But then there's also an argument that there could also be small hamlets that are yet to be built. So what happens, or what is likely to happen in these cities in Africa? And indeed, many are dotted around the city, or rather around the continent. But then if you're going to think about mitigating and also adapting and optimizing the core benefits and synergies, then there are four main areas of work. And those areas are spatial planning, which we know only makes returns medium to long term. Electrification, which you know that is not a straightforward thing. Why? Because you can use fossil fuels to generate electricity and then you bring it to the charge stations and then that is considered to be green. But in essence, it's not green because the embodied emissions are actually coming from fossil fuels. So it's a tricky thing to do, but also nature-based solutions or ecosystem restoration in green and lifestyle. Those are the most tricky thing, but there's no low-hanging fruit when it comes to electrification opportunities, as well as the ecosystem restoration, as long as they're made beneficial. And I will illustrate with some few examples towards the end. So in the African context, if you're going to make urban equitable, then you have to think about different worldviews. You have to think about micro, small, medium enterprises. You have to actually find ways in which you can integrate what is considered disruptive, innovative technologies in the different sectors of urban. And you also have to think about hybridization, so that you start to break loose from the past dependencies of highly networked, highly centralized, that require huge investments. We know that that's the bottleneck. Every other city that plans to put up a rail or to open up a new landfill or to construct a sewage treatment plant assumes and thinks that this is a huge investment in millions of euros or millions of dollars, and it always goes to look out for this credit from the big investors. And that is a lock in itself. It's path dependencies, but there are opportunities that could be thought of in a different way. Now, if you're going to think about urban systems transition, then climate change is a good lens, but climate change is not the only problem. It's not the only problem globally, but it's a good way of making entry into it. Why? Because with energy, Africa's resourcefulness in terms of renewable energy is undoubted, and therefore Africa can actually drive the transition in the energy sector, but one which also integrates adaptation and resilience building. And IPCC identifies four systems that require change. One is energy, the other one is land use and ecosystem, and then urban infrastructure and industry. And all these four have direct resonance or impact on urban. They can also be influenced by urban Africa. Remember, not city, but by urban. And I'll show some examples of what I mean urban. And therefore, from an administrative management point of view, governance, cities become very central, but cities must also embrace the areas around their jurisdictional boundaries to embrace urban. But radicalism in the systems change is also going to be very necessary. And radicalism in physical infrastructure, radicalism in institutional and arrangements and changes, as well as financing, is going to be very critical for that. And we say that based on the scientific literature that has been assessed in IPCC. So this transition is urgent, and I postulate that Africa has an opportunity to break the path dependencies using the climate change lens and entry to break loose the dependencies and mitigation potential through the low-hanging fruit of nature-based solutions or ecosystems restoration is not only going to be mitigative, but it will also be resilience building. If you plan and design cities and neighborhoods in a different way, with this being framed as green, blue infrastructure, my preference is ecosystem restoration. So this is a very good example with the Kazanchis corridor that has been opened up, and the restoration of the Kaki River, I think, the ecosystem around that. But Nairobi is now getting on board on that as well. River Matare and even River Ngong are also being redesigned. In the Longwe, Malawi, again, the river that bisects the city is also being planned and ecosystem restoration is going on. But in the difference between these three cases and why I bring that is that whereas Malawi has integrated resilience building, adaptation, and economically beneficial restoration measures, the Addis as well as Nairobi have spent it differently. That is, it's to drive investments. And the assumption is that once investments come into this corridor, then opportunities for employment will be created. But we've seen that before, not only in Ethiopia, but also in Uganda, where foreign direct investments do not translate seamlessly into job creation. But nothing is being looked at in terms of employability. So the spin here in that we learned from Malawi is creating opportunities that would provide opportunities for creating economic activities that would provide opportunities for becoming employable. Reason is being simple, that the life skills of many African urban dwellers, most of whom are youth. So we know that it's also, the continent is also has a youthful population that is large. The thing is that their life skills are not matching the job market requirements. And if they're not matching, then you cannot continue just pushing industrial development. You have to think differently. And therefore, employability and job creation, in our conception, could be two different things, and could mean that the strategies for economic development and urban being the driver for that could be different if you think about employability in addition to job creation. Now, remember, I'm not saying that job creation is bad. It can still go on, but it is not absorbing as many urban dwellers as it should. Therefore, you have to complement it with something else. So the potentials are there. We're also seeing many examples that are emerging in terms of material substitution for housing, for infrastructure, low carbon emission materials, but also designs, architectural designs that actually build on traditional knowledge in Africa with the traditional hut, grass thatched house that minimizes the use of energy, minimizes the reliance on air conditioning because of natural aeration. So those designs are there, but they are disparate and at micro level. They have not been popularized. But then the key challenge is about governance systems. And that's where we postulate again that governance systems have to become aggressively transformative. But the solutions to that, or the entry point to that, is not known. So we are actually trying to, there's been a lot of discussion about multi-level governance, but it doesn't really deliver the tools that would make governance systems become aggressively transformative, because they're still in the lock-in by governance systems with decision-making, the agencies, the public agencies, the utility companies, the government itself, the decision-making process for investment prioritization and acquisition of financing for that. There is a lock-in, and that lock-in is very entrenched. Breaking loose of that is something that requires more research that has to be worked on. And there can be many paths to transition towards transformation. You can think of entering climate change, dealing with risk, establishing knowledge networks, identifying needs of disadvantaged population, but not forgetting those that fall in between the privileged and the disadvantaged. There's always that middle population that we forget about, and also reducing disaster risk. And not just to climate change disaster, but also other disasters. The UNDRR has a very extensive peril classification of about 8 parent perils, and underneath of them, a good number of them actually are recorded in many urban areas. So meteorological, climatological, hydrometeorological disasters, of course, seismology, and we saw the impact of the earthquake in Syria and Turkey recently. So the big cities, the cities that were close to the epicenter were actually desolated with that. So that is something that has to be looked at. And to map out those transition pathways is going to be very critical in Africa. That means we shouldn't continue to rely on sector-based approach to urban development. We need integration, and you need to map out what is feasible in a particular context in order to achieve the transformation. And if you're going to do that, then agency matters. And agency matters, I think I'm not going to speak a lot about this slide, but agency matters because of this traditional, again, deeply entrenched principal-agent relationship, where a particular agent works on behalf of the other. So think about the state, think about the municipality working and planning and investing for the public. And then the public has to adhere. But when we see increasingly that individuals and collectives of the individuals at granular level, as I'll show in the examples, are starting to take matters into their own hands, in other words, exercising their agency to identify solutions that work for them. And it's not just survival. In some of the instances, it is actually thriving, but some level of decency has to be applied through what we now convincingly think of as plan to invest and support. Plan to invest and support in the agency of individuals and collectives. So that discussion is very interesting. If you think about the different possible nodes of agency, this is what it could mean in the city. So many actors and these nodes, people collectively or individually are making decisions. Think about the utility companies, think about the grassroots organizations, the energy companies, the waste management companies, contractors, real estate operators. These are making decisions into the city. How do you weave all these different actors to exercise multi-agency based approach to urban development? And what is the entry point? What is the feasible point? And what are the limits of doing that? Is it a big challenge? Of course it is if you're going to bring them together. That's why the entrenchment of the lock-in and path dependencies is still so strong. But it's possible also to start small and build systems that can allow the change in collective and individual agency. And this map here, which comes from the USCCRN, that is the Urban Climate Change Research Network Assessment Report number 3, just shows the 3 areas of equity in red, environmental, sustainability, green, and quality of life as blue. And you can see that when it comes to equity in Africa, the gaps are very glaring. Environmental sustainability, why it seems to be good from that assessment is that many African cities are still green. They're still green compared to some cities that are really mega. But there are also some areas where equity is a big issue, and this stands out there. That is Lagos, Nigeria. So Lagos has the Lagos Strategic Development Plan for the next 10 years, and it's very clear in that plan on that strategy that the vibrance of the economy of Lagos is going to be based on network infrastructure. But Lagos has arguably about 60 to 70% of the population that lies in the lower middle to lower income in terms of accruals. So how can the networked infrastructure actually enable this population in Lagos to thrive when practically on the ground, if you visited Lagos and you again walk to the bus stations of the rapid transit, you will see more people lining up for the smaller buses than the rapid transit buses. Why? Because of expense, similar to Addis. And yet there's an overemphasis on these very networked large-scale infrastructure bases, which I'm not saying that is bad, but there has to be a context. And the context here is that not everybody can afford that. So how do you weave in affordability, accessibility, and coverage for all one? And because of that, there's increasing private car mobility use, and that locks in the city in terms of traffic, and it's very much known for its traffic problems. So the worldviews have to be very different. There has to be disruptive. This is already mentioned, but just to emphasize that picture, that if you're going to balance equity, environmental sustainability, and quality of life, then you have to think about integration in urban. And to do that, you have to think differently. And this image just shows you the sort of categorized broad areas. If you think about the physical space being a planner, a spatial planner, this is the way we think. So brain is water, utilities, natural and the like. Green is nature, human is economy and the like, and then culture and gray. And the reliance on gray is very heavy when it comes to networked and highly centralized systems. But if you're going to combine them, you have to think differently. How do I find that critical balance between these, and how do I plan in such a way that blue and green have synergistic opportunities harnessed, but not just blue and green, but blue, green, and human in terms of economy. So later on, I'll give an example of urban and peri-urban agriculture and forestry, and we see some evidence around that it's not just about thrift food production, but it's actually providing income for a good number of people. But the way it is being practiced is not optimal. Why? Because it's not planned, it is not supported, there's no investment going into that. So going back to those 3 words I mentioned earlier, you have to plan, you have to get the investment, and you have to support directly if it's going to work. So it has to be a different way of balancing the urban system, and the urban system is really changing a lot. an example here about some of the existing systems. So you can think of this as transportation, you can think of it as sewage, you can think of it as water, you can think of it as drainage, you can also think of it as nodes of employment, the industrial zones. The planning that traditionally has always been done, industrial land use is separated from residential land use. And different land uses are categorized and mapped out and planned in different way. So it's highly centralized, but you can continue doing that in the future by building on the existing old system, but we know that it's not happening at the pace that we need, or you could break the system a little bit and decentralize. It means you localize the responses, you localize the opportunities, you also localize and start working around the materialities that could be changed or even substituted. So in some situations, there's a possibility to move away from the concrete and steel in terms of sewage treatment to nature-based, wetland-based management of waste. If you have a manageable system that is not highly centralized, then those possibilities can be explored, the feasibility analysis can be conducted, and then the investment opportunities could be identified. So future systems need to be looking like that. But it doesn't mean that only that. There could also be situations in the old, rapidly established and rapidly growing cities. This is still relevant, but if we piggybacked with that in the expansion areas, which is urban, then it might make sense to integrate through that element. Other systems could also be thought of this way. So you have on-site sanitation vendors, formalized water system there, but then with the growth that is happening going beyond the jurisdictions, then do you expand on existing systems or do you create subsystems around it and then eventually network them? All these are scenarios. It doesn't mean that it should be worked out this way. In some situations, it might be that you need only 2 of these and not 4 or 5. And that depends on the context. And that pushes back on the toolbox that I talked about earlier, because the toolbox pushes this, expand on existing system or design new systems. Now, the word in sanitation is decentralized sanitation system, but they're still in the highly network and huge, require huge investments as well. So that is an example. There is a lot of opportunity that could be related with the circular economy by tapping materials from the waste and other opportunities, surface water, groundwater, rainwater, or energy, and then you reclaim them and recycle those materials, whether it is solid or water or liquid, and then they come back into the system, sometimes as hygienized sludge that could be utilized for agricultural production. So many examples, but again, they're disparate. If you go to Durban, they are doing the capture of nutrients from sewage coming off the pipeline network. In Kampala, they are trying now testing, I think they've done about 4 or 5 tests for the tapping beneath the landfill to capture methane from the landfill, which unfortunately a couple of months ago, part of it collapsed and killed people. So that has stalled a little bit, but there's been that discussion about how do we capture the methane from this landfill, and then it is utilized for something else, maybe generation of electricity and then uploaded on the centralized grid. So there are all these opportunities that have not been explored, and yet they could offer a lot of economic opportunities, a lot of possibilities for coverage, improved coverage, possibilities for affordability, but also access. And if you're going to develop the cities or the urban areas, then we have to think low emissions development, and again, a repetition of the 4 sectors that require transition: energy, materials, industry, but also the project, policy, or program. Do you go for project or policy or program? And the projectization has been critiqued. It looks like there has to be a program in the urban areas in order to do that. There's been a trial in several cities in several countries. Kenya is a good example, I think, that I can come up in my head right now, where the new structure of decentralization of governance has created the whole county government for the city. And the boundaries, I think, were adjusted a little bit. Why? To allow planning on that urban area in that context, with including a little bit of the peri-urban areas. So that then gives room to think about integrated systems. So the rivers that I talked about they used to go beyond the Nairobi City Council. But now, because they are part of the county, you can do upstream, downstream restoration. And therefore, focusing on only a few areas along the river is not good enough if where the problem comes from, there's nothing that is being done. That's the integration we're talking about, spatial, but also temporal integration. And then the benefits from that could be in form of those examples of peri-urban agriculture or even forestry that could provide jobs, that could improve green infrastructure, that could be supportive of ambient air quality improvement, that could translate into better health. And that means minimalization of cost and health. Again, a topic that I don't want to bring in, but when it comes to health, the past dependencies are also very strong. And sustainable development is not a policy tick box thing. It has to be embedded in all these possible solutions, disruptive or otherwise, but integrated in a way that they complement each other. So some examples from theory to practice. This is an example in Kampala of the school energy project, tapping energy from the toilets, the latrines, where in this primary school. This was, I think, 2014, 2013. It was only one model school, one model bio toilet. But as we speak now, there are over 100 that have been constructed in all public schools. Why? Because the toilet block is there. This is a collection tank, of course, nicely piped. And then the digester, and then the mixer. The methane is tapped, and then it goes to the kitchen. And that reduced the number of trucks of wood fuel that were brought to cook food in that primary school from around 7 to 3. And over time, that even reduced it to 1. So this is an off-grid solution that is workable. As I said, from one school around that time to over 100 is something that translates into emissions avoided, translates into deforestation avoided. If it could be popularized, it is different from a highly centralized, highly networked sewage treatment plant. And what is also interesting is that because schools break off for holiday, and in Uganda they can break off for maybe 3 weeks minimum and sometimes a month or 2, then the school teachers who are sleeping around the school on the compound would get problems in terms of the energy for cooking. So what they do, the nearby people who often do not have good sanitation would be encouraged to use this facility so that the feeder continues. So then it provides a little bit of enhancement of life for those people. Another, again, in managing human waste is also off the grid with a business model of this technology called the GALPA. It's a vacuum pump with tanks. Okay, this is moving so fast. With these 200 cubic meter tanks. And then these boys here are called the GALPA boys. They organize themselves as a company. And then on the call with the Kampala Capital City Authority in the neighborhood, they receive a call through a toll-free line. They take their tricycle, charge for every 200 cubic meter at that household latrine, and then they go to dump it in a transfer tank, and that transfer tank dumps to the sewage treatment plant. So there is a charge here, and there is a charge there, but there's also a charge there. So the whole value chain is evolving in Kampala around that. And this is not only in Kampala, it's also evolving in Nigeria, Lagos. It's also evolving, supported by Water for People. And this is how coverage would look like for those stuff. Now, there are many other detailed technicalities associated with this. One, are the pit latrines reusable once you get that? What about the costs? So Kampala Capital City Authority, what it has done is to design minimalist standards for latrines using 3 principles: emptyable, cleanable, and reusable. Because most of them currently are just holes dug into the ground. And when they are emptied, they become weak and often sometimes they collapse. But if you design it in such a way that it has support in terms of bricks and like, then it becomes reusable, because then you can empty almost 100% and then it becomes reusable. So you don't need to dig another hole elsewhere. So this integration of governance with technological solutions, or what we call here as disruptive or innovative solutions, is something that is emerging but has not yet been popularized, as we say. Another area again is the municipal waste, solid waste mainly. And in this, there are so many possibilities that are emerging, from this situation of dumping anywhere to sorting, and then creating manufacturing energy briquettes, which are marketed. Again, Kampala Capital City Authority adopted this, and it popularized the use of these energy briquettes. There are different models and different types of these that are manufactured. They popularized them in their public markets, especially those markets that involve cooked food vending. So they popularized that, and it is it has a backward linkage with the communities where the energy briquettes come from, because there is a sustainable pathway or value chain that provides income to those people. And comparatively, in terms of energy and calorific value, the comparison between wood fuel, energy briquette, and charcoal is such that the energy briquette can stay for longer with the burning rate compared to wood fuel, because you have to replenish, compared to charcoal as well. So charcoal burns a high caloric value in a short period of time, and then the caloric value reduces, and then you have to replenish it. Similar thing with wood, but with the energy briquette, the blue here shows you that the calorific value, the burn rate continues for a longer period of time. And it's preferred, especially by the women who then cooked food for the cooking certain types of food in the system. Now, the opportunities here are immense. How are they being harnessed? Not so much. Why? Because there's no support, there's no direct investment, and there's no planning for this kind of innovations that are integrative of human culture and great. And I end this set of examples with this picture. And I don't know whether you recognize the picture. I took it in 2017 in Washington on G Street East. I was walking to office, and then I saw, this is the government printer, yeah, this one, of the United States. And then I was walking to office in that direction, and I said, okay, what is this? And then there's their pipes, and then what caught my eye was howling leftover political debates. So they were actually emptying whatever it is, septic tank or toilet of the government printer of the United States with a cesspool empty. This is an off-grid system. But the financial architecture in Africa still pushes centralized and highly networked. That was the other reason that I took it, not only the politics that is being overhauled after those debates, but it is an off-grid system. It means there's a possibility to use off-grid systems as standalone, but off-grid systems as complementary to centralized networks. A good example that if it happens elsewhere, it can also happen in different ways. And then the last example is to do with urban expansion and anticipation of land use competition. There is a publication by Karen and others, Annette and myself, that shows anticipation of resource consumption and competition around urban areas. Now, this is the example I want to use to illustrate urban from city. And that means that the competition between urban and agriculture, forestry, and biofuels is intense. Urban and agriculture and urban and forestry is quite intense. And we see it here. This is the growth of Kampala, 1995 to 2001. The dark areas are the built-up environment, and the surrounding area, which is green, the ecosystem, some of which are forests, are remnants of rainforest, but also agricultural land. And the expansion through real estate development infrastructure is heightening the competition for land. And that cuts into the resources, particularly food production. And this is not only Kampala, we did it at even continental level, and it was showing in many of the cities, for example, Banjul, and around some of the big cities in Nigeria, Ibadan, Ife, and the like. The competition between urban and agricultural land is very intense, and that leads to fragmentation. Fragmentation in this map shows the dark areas, brown, orange, whatever. White is totally built up, so roof area. Brown is partially built up, and green. So you can see the intensity of competition in the center of that. Now, this is where the concept of the city of Kampala is that boundary. But urban extends beyond that boundary. So you can see the brown reddish areas are outside that boundary. So it means urban goes beyond the jurisdiction. And if you're going to plan, you need actually to consider urban more than city, but you have to work with the nearby jurisdictions. Those could be municipalities or could be cities or whatever. They could also be rural sub-counties, as in some countries they are called, or municipalities in Accra, or provinces. You need to work with them in order to not control urban growth, but manage urban growth in a way that is beneficial for the entire population and the region in terms of ecosystem, but also opportunities and people and creating jobs. So the natural assets are reducing, and at the very coarse scale of the image analysis, the hotspots in the surrounding areas. The hotspots in red are those areas which are really threatened by urbanization, and urbanization through settlement, construction, but also agriculture. In this region, there are quite a number of rainforests, and therefore expansion of agriculture into the rainforest is considered to be a competition that is also increasing this number of hotspots around the region. If you zoom in further into the boundary here, but the urban development around it, and with the high resolution satellite imagery, then you can start to see the level of fragmentation of ecosystems. That's why I talk about ecosystem restoration more than just green and blue infrastructure. And you can see that the plan for the future for this region is such that it's again going to be reliant on networked infrastructure, highways through and around, the circular roads, or what are they called, the ring roads. They want to construct a second ring road. In the plan, there's even a third ring road. And in another plan, there's also an idea of a bridge to connect this part through that bay. So fragmentation is real, but fragmentation comes at a cost. But there are opportunities even if you're fragmenting the landscape by restoring some patches of the ecosystem in those landscapes. But the jurisdictional and administrative problem becomes very clear. The contestation between benefits by the private sector and the social perspective is also very important to think about. There are certain things that private sector feels they should be going out for that actually are not what the social perspective would be looking out for. And this comes to social responsibility, environmental care, and that translates into the different stakeholders that need to be addressed, consulted, if you're going to plan for this competition of land use. So the last slide is just how do we seize the opportunities? The couple of points I want to raise. One is that we need transformative urban and spatial planning. We need to revise standards. We need to revise codes. We need to adapt them to the context. Most of them are still very Eurocentric. And they also have to be very flexible, because we see that flexibility in many cities happening in Africa. We also have to really plan, support, and invest in alternative solutions, either it's in energy, waste, water, road infrastructure, whatever, decentralized, multi-nuclear, decentralized systems. These are things that we have to work on, but the context matters a lot. But the other thing is that there's so much talked about informality. Can also be thought of and looked at as an emerging sector rather than informal. So it's not just a problem, the opportunity is there. So think about the energy briquettes, where do they come from? Think about the bio-toilet in the school close to a neighborhood that is unplanned. So it's an emerging sector. There are solutions in there, and we always go with identifying problems because we fixated with deficits, but there are also opportunities that could be harnessed, but that could be expanded if we plan, invest, and support. Those three words, I'll repeat them. Plan, invest, and support. How to do that? You need to change radically the institutional and the governance systems. And for the future cities, whether existing, rapidly growing, or emerging, or yet to be built, there are a lot of things that have to be done completely differently. And that information is coming from the IPCC, but it's also coming from some of the studies that we are conducting. And if you're going to achieve anything, then you have to go beyond the sector. Integration is the way, and you have to work on all these different systems concurrently. So going back to the new ways of thinking, the urban challenge and new ways of thinking, the human blue, green culture, and it has to be done concurrently, not just as separate, because we see no seamless translation once you do it separately. But we're starting to see possibilities in integrating them, but they are not supported, they are not invested in, and they are not planned for properly. And the planning I'm referring to here in those three words is not the planning that I was trained to do only. It's the planning that I was trained to do adjusted to the situation in a particular context. Lagos is different from Addis, different from Kampala, different from Kinshasa, different from Kigali. But if you go to Juba and Kigali in Africa, they have this grandiose vision of what Kigali should be and Juba should be that is akin to Dubai. And you really wonder whether that is where the urban should be going in Africa. But that is my personal opinion about it. And thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Sandika, for the first session. In this second part, we have the Africa Thesis Award offered to Rahel. I want to congratulate you on this. Yes, so we have about half an hour and we'll divide it into 4. I'll briefly first introduce the award itself, and then Mandipa will tell a little bit about the procedure, how the process of selecting this thesis of Rahel to earn the award. And then Rahel herself will give us a short presentation, a highlight of her prize-winning research, and then we'll have a question and answer session, a short one. So it means an intense half an hour, but to be fun. And to say briefly, maybe you want to show the thesis award page. Let's see, but it's not necessary. The Africa Thesis Award is an initiative of the African Studies Center. By the way, did I introduce myself? Not today. Sorry. So my name is Azeb Amaha. I am a staff member of the African Studies Center. And I am chairing the program, the Research Master African Studies, in which Rahel studied. As I will explain quickly, although the African Studies Center has teaching programs in the Masters and Research Master programs, not many awardees are from our program. And that is, of course, the case when you have an independent jury. So the African Thesis Award is an initiative of the African Studies Center, but it is managed by an independent jury. It has a 5-member jury. It's led by Professor Dr. Margriet van der Waal. She's from Groningen University and also partly working at the UvA in Amsterdam, the University of Amsterdam. And then there are other jury members. One of them is, I think, you are Manix. He's not around it. Oh, okay, he's on the way. So there is a journalist, Manix, the Buren, sorry, I should get his name right. Marnix de Bruin. He is a journalist of international affairs. He's a member of the jury. There have been traditions of journalists involved in this jury. And then there are 2 researchers involved, early career scholars, Dr. Tanya Hendricks from Ghent University currently, and Dr. Agnesia Kazimierczyn. Her name is difficult, so she is also a member of the jury, and then a PhD candidate, and that is Mandipa, who is among us here. And the first Africa Thesis Award was offered in 2003 by the then director of the African Studies Center, the late Professor Gertie Hessling. After that, each year we have had the Africa Thesis Award, except in the COVID year 2020. So if COVID didn't disrupt, this year would have been a kind of coming of age for the Africa Thesis Award, 21st year, but Rahel's award is the 20th in the list. And it was offered, officially it was meant to be offered in December last year, but Rahel was then in Tahiti, I think. So she was on a field research trip, so she didn't get the award at that time. So this special event is organized for you in that sense. Why this award? Why is an initiative taken? It is to encourage research in understanding African cultures and societies. It is to encourage students to do research on Africa-related projects. And the kind of students that we look at are master's students, master's or research master students. And they can be from any university within the Netherlands or any university from Africa. And then the requirement for the thesis is that it should be kind of empirical research based. So a nice, an excellent summary of secondary resources would not pass as empirical research. So it kind of hands-on fieldwork experience is required. And it can be on, a region in Africa, a country in Africa, or whatever, but also Africans who are residing elsewhere in the world. So this Africa focus is important. What the award offers is 500 euros, and it facilitates publication of the thesis that is awarded as part of the collection of our library, the Africa collection in our library. And also those who have applied and didn't win the prize get a kind of publication, digital publication of their thesis and being cataloged within the African Studies Library, which makes their work visible, although they don't win the prize. So all competing theses will be promoted. So for you, so here is the invitation to promote this award. If you know of, if you supervise a student, a student research which stands out in terms of subject, methodology, or of some interest, so please, tell them to apply. And what happens after their application is something that we will hear by example, because Mandeepa will tell us about the process, what happened after submission of Rahel's thesis, which is a kind of regular procedure. It will tell us how the jury selects, on what basis and what procedures are followed, so that follow-up applications can be looked at, and then you know what you are recommending to the student that you are telling the award about. Yeah, Mandeepa, may I give you the floor?
Well, I wasn't planning to be up here again, but I guess this is what happens when you wear multiple hats. My fellow jury member is still on the way, so I am standing in his place. I have now been part of the selection committee for the African Thesis Award for about 3 years. And I must say, I was yet to see such a diligently put together thesis. So really, Rachel, a round of applause for you. So Rachel's thesis, which is entitled "They Think We Can Eat the Condominium: Chronicles of Economic and Social Political Practices in Addis Ababa's Condominiums," won over not one, but 2 runners-up out of 35 entrants. If I'm not mistaken, this is the first time in a very long time we've had 2 runners-up. So it shows just how competitive it was and just how brilliant the thesis was. So this thesis came in with 34 others. And what happens is the file that gets sent through is the file of the entrants. So we have your thesis, we have a recommendation letter, and we have the write-up, the abstract that is put into the file. And then it gets sent out and distributed amongst the five readers, if you could call it that. Once the 5 readers have their share, you usually have about 3 or 4 theses to read. You then write a recommendation saying this thesis is good, it can pass, based on various levels of criterion. So social impact, academic or scientific integrity, rigor. There's a full list and document that we go through. After that, it gets circulated and swapped again for a second reader to cross-check that the theses that you put forward to go on the long list should be there. And then the long list gets cemented, and that's about 12. After that, we then go through another reading process where we swap it again for the third time. And so you can tell it was read quite a lot. Everyone agreed. It was read quite a lot of times. And then after that's done, a short list is created with about 4 or 5 theses. I think last year we had about 6 even. And then everybody, by the time a winner is selected, everybody has read and everybody has deliberated and decided. I remember in this selection year, there was a standoff because there were 3 brilliant theses and we didn't know how to select one. And we started picking our brains about what to do. Okay, publishing is not a problem, but how do we figure out the 500 euros and how do we, but yours stood out because of its societal relevance. And I think that's something I'd really like to drum in on. If there's anybody that's doing a master's online or if you're supervising somebody, let's keep pushing out work that's societally relevant because it does make a difference. And I mean, the way your work investigates the impact of inner city renewal in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, focusing on the population that relocated from urban slums into a newly built condominium unit and exploring that transition, shaping the economic, social, and political practices is really to be commended. It's really evident just how impactful and socially mobile practices are for life-sustaining social networks of slums that are lost, while economic practices become contained and unworkable in the new condominium context, leading to class and ethnic tensions. The jury was really struck by your exceptional scholarly contribution to a discussion on phenomenon that is increasingly observed in the African urban context, yet hardly investigated until now. Also, we'd like to express our admiration for you, for the manner in which you utilized your own diasporic positionality, one that connects Africa and Europe together. We thought that was a brilliant touch. And to identify this relevant thesis topic and to execute it in such a commendable manner. So on behalf of the jury, I'd like to say congratulations to you once again.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel Dubale, or also Rahel Dubale in America. And I wrote a research project named They Think We Can Eat the Condominium, Chronicles of Economic, Social, and Political Practices in Addis Abeba's Condominium. It was supervised by Professor Marlene Decker from Leiden University and Dr. Teshome Mana from Addis Ababa University. So I think it would be difficult to describe my research project without starting from my home. And when I talk about home, I mainly mean my home in Italy first, which is where I was born. I was born in Bologna in the northern part of Italy, and I was raised in an amazing house in the countryside. But then every 2 years, eventually, during summer, I would actually move 7,000 kilometers away in my Ethiopian home. And so my Ethiopian home, in a way, was a house where me and my parents were living. But at the same time, there was also Uncle Desu. And with Uncle Desu came Uncle Jeje. And then with Uncle Jeje, there was Auntie Beshu. And with Auntie Beshu, cousin Samri. And with cousin Samri, cousin Meron. And the list could go on and on and on. But eventually this would stop, and it would stop with my grandmother's, because that was my grandmother's house. And I think that back in the day, that really meant everything for me. It was an interesting experience per se, because it was the experience of having rain falling on you, because sometimes the roof was broken, not having basic facilities, sometimes like toilet or even shower. But I think that as cheesy as it may sound, we had each other, and I think that was enough. And so when it comes to the context, this is kind of where a personal story turns into a broader one, I would say, because my house, or my Ethiopian house, was my grandmother's house, and it was an informal house located in Woreda 7, which I translate here as District 7 in the subcity of Cercos at Addis Ababa. You could see the planimetry there. What was interesting of that area is that low-income residents were living there, but at the same time, this stands in stark contrast with the facilities that were there and the people that would actually visit it, because it was full actually of international and national headquarters. And there were also many famous hotels nearby, such as the Sheraton Hotel that I don't know if you could see, but it's the one with the pool over there. And I think that going back to what I was saying of we had each other and that was enough. I think that what I meant broadly is the fact that there were strong structures of sociability, which again in literature they're mainly called the social capital. And in the Ethiopian context, it's quite difficult to, let's say, explain all the type of social capital that you would have. But just to give you a hint, you had some institutional way of having social capital, which were Idderiko and Mahaber. They are kind of like a community organization that would walk someone through their life from death to marriage. People would actually pool resources, which could be money, but even food. And then you had the more informal ones, which were also thriving in the area. So that could be the lending or demanding of food or taking care of someone's kid. And what happened in 2010 is that actually my grandmother's house, along with 2,300 houses and 74 businesses, was demolished as part of the Integrated Housing Development Program. And that was a housing policy that was initiated in 2006 by the Ministry of Work and Development in Ethiopia. And I think that the overall aim was actually to try and increase the housing supply for the growing population, but at the same time mitigate the slum expansion in the area. And once evicted, people, depending on their status, so if they were homeowners or maybe renters of the previous area, they would have three types of compensation. So the first one was a financial compensation. If not, the second one was a plot of land in the countryside. And the third one was were condominium complexes, which is actually the one where my grandmother and her family went in 2011, I think. And so I think that what was interesting for me is that when I used to visit back then these condominium complexes, which were actually hailed by the government and the people as these modern solutions to the housing supply and the growing demand, basic facilities were actually lacking. So there was no electricity, there was no water. And so I asked myself, what happens to these people when they move there? So these relocated people, and how can they actually fit into their previous social capital if now they're scattered all around the country, let's say, or the city per se. And I couldn't find actually in the literature some solutions of this real life impact of these relocations. And so I decided to investigate it myself. And I used as a concept, the broader concept of Robert Putnam, that in 1993 essentially said that for low-income people, social capital is necessary to get by. And so my main question was, how does condominium life shape the economic, social, and political practices of Addis Abeba's relocated citizens? And my side questions were actually linked to the three spheres where I think that social capital could work. So on the economic level, how has the livelihood of people relocated to Gemo 1 condominium evolved compared to their former neighborhoods? In what ways do condominium inhabitants, particularly the relocated ones, forge new collective ways of living in Gemo 1, so linked to the social side? And the third one, politically, what is the result of linking Woreda 7, which I intended there as the local government in Ethiopia and the municipality per se, link with their new environment in Gemo 1 condominium? And so when I talk about Gemo 1 condominium, that was my main area of study during my 6/7 months in Addis Abeba. It's one of the largest and first condominium complexes created after or during the Integrated Housing Development Program, and is standing in the area of the subcity of Nefasel Klafto, so over there, which could actually look pretty close by Cercos, which is the one of the previous area of the relocated people, but actually don't believe the map because distances in Ethiopia, they're just not how they look like. But so essentially what I did was first doing some residential stay, which basically meant staying at my parents' family house, which were actually living in Gemo 2 and Gemo 3, so not the area that I was studying. But this actually helped me into, let's say, trying to be somewhat acquainted with the area. And I did a lot of observation from slow profiling to just sit there and see what was going, because there was a lot going on in Gemo 1 condominium. And this is something that I did not expect per se. And then when as I said, when I got acquainted to the area and the area got acquainted with me, meaning that the people started to talk to me or trust me or didn't see me as someone that is just an outsider, I did some participatory action research, which basically means not only doing research on someone, but doing it with someone, so talking to people. And this eventually translated in semi-structured interviews in Amharic, except one in English. And then to kind of complement the framework, I did some surveys to the local administration, because I wanted to know what was their state of play, what did they think about these condominium complexes and the facilities that they were actually offering. And this turned out to be 38 interviews, 3 focus group discussions. So my total sample of study was around 50 interviewees. They were not only involving development-induced relocated people, but a broader scope, which were also renters and house owners within the condominium. And I submitted 6 surveys. So when it comes to the chronicles, maybe, or the outcome, I tried to do a bit of a compare and contrast exercise. So starting with the Woreda 7, so the previous area of the relocated inhabitants, again, as I said, there were a lot of location advantages, because actually people would economically sustain themselves surrounding or maybe basing themselves on the area they were living in. So for instance, being close to a hotel would mean that you could clean a tourist car, or that you can even clean their shoes. And then the question now is, was that enough to sustain themselves economically? Well, if it was not the case, which was not, they had strong and flourishing social network, which actually links to the second point, which is socially. So socially, I think that what I witnessed, or what I've heard from, is that there was a broad fictive kinship structure, which means that maybe there were no, let's say, bonds by blood, but the community really felt and behaved like they were part of a family. They stayed there for more than 50 years, so they really trust each other. And then also reciprocity were very high. When it comes to the political side, actually, maybe what is worth mentioning is that the reason why I was interested on the political side is the fact that, according to Robert Putnam's theory, when social capital is not there, the government can act as a promoter in a way to build some social capital among the residents. And so I think that in the case of Woreda 7, that role of the government from that angular perspective, it was not very needed per se. But besides that, what people told me is that there were many short, or let's say horizontal relationships. The geographical local governments were quite strict, which means that local people could, local representatives were acting as peers with the residents. When it comes to Gemo 1, so at first economically, well, I have to say that 12 or 14 years ago, Gemo 1 was very isolated. So it was very difficult to have some sort of like economic or a job in general in that area. So what people would do was at the beginning going back to their previous area, which means even 1 or 2 hours of transport just to clean someone's car or shoes and just to get by. But when the price of transports got too high, what people did was actually try to find some new income generating activities. And I think that's quite a success stories of Gemo 1 condominium. But the problem is that, according to my research, that's just a success story for few people. And so what some people found was a kind of self-employment and private company work. And then again, my question was this enough then to sustain their livelihood? And if not, what kind of social capital do people rely to? And I think that overall the outcome is that while there was a fictive kinship in the previous neighborhood, in this new one, there's more of a nuclear kinship, meaning that the generalized trust is quite strict and is mainly linked to the family members, but that are actually linked by blood then. There are a lot of trust issues, which are mainly due to the fact that there's a constant turnover of people in Gemo. There are newcomers actually every day that try and go, and then they don't really invest in having some sort of social fabric because they don't really see the interest in doing that. But I could also find some kind of stronger social networks or social capital outside the block, which I think that was quite interesting. Because then my question was, okay, but how can we try to build what's outside the block within the blocks? And then when it comes to the political side, I think that overall, many interviews actually mentioned that there were a lot of patronage networks, and the ethnic component was really rising in their replies. And in terms of local government, they really didn't see the presence or the value. And this actually brings me to, let's say, my last slide, but also my title of my thesis, which is actually part of a broader sentence that was actually stated by Tia Toreya, which was one of my interviewees, when I've asked her, okay, but what do you think about the fact that you moved to these condominium complexes? Is it something good, something bad? What do you think about the local government? And she told me, okay, the Kabele tells us, by Kabele she meant the local government, you have the condominium, they think we can hit the condominium, but we were taken and thrown here by the government. We didn't come here voluntarily. And I think that maybe just to use this as kind of like a way to have a reflection, I think that if condominium models are, let's say, increasingly seen as the housing solution for the growing population and especially for low-income people, and these condominium actually are not providing any kind of improvement in terms of basic facilities, in terms of electricity and water, then maybe at least on the research side, maybe what we need is actually to have some kind of real life assessment of how to rebuild the social fabric that was there. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Rani, for that interesting recap, please statement. Yeah, it's a wonderful presentation, and also, highlights the problems that are still going on 14 years on. There are still evictions from the center of the city to remote areas in the periphery of the city of people like your own family, like you showed. So this is an interesting personal story, but also kind of objective analysis of a highly timely topic. So congratulations again.